Welcome to Regulated Roots, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the cannabis industry's most influential brands and talented minds behind them. I am your host, Kimberly Simms, and today I am thrilled to be joined by my friend and colleague Caren Woodson, Senior Director of Compliance and Licensing at Kiva Brands. Over the course of our conversation, we'll dive into different strategies and challenges and insights that Caren has on compliance, one of my favorite topics. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, or you're just getting into the industry, or you're simply fascinated by what it is we do in the cannabis space, this is the podcast for you. So let's jump right in. Caren, thank you so much. Welcome to Regulated Roots. I am very excited to have you here today. Will you start just by introducing yourself to our audience, letting them know a little bit about you and your background?
Of course, my pleasure. Again, my name is Caren Woodson. I am the Senior Director of Compliance and Licensing for Kiva Brands, which encompasses Kiva Confections and KSS, our distribution arm. I've worked in cannabis law and policy reform for about 25 years, spanning nonprofit advocacy with groups like ASA and the Drug Policy Alliance, and in nearly every facet of the regulated market, from cultivation to retail. With the exception of a 4-year brief hiatus that I took with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, I've been in the cannabis space for nearly my entire professional career.
That's wild. You know, I've been doing this for 15 years, serving the industry as an attorney, and I feel like that is truly a lifetime, like it's dog years. So I figure you're like in your hundreds then.
I feel that sometimes.
It ages you.
It provides perspective, so that's critical.
It does. I think both of us then have really seen the full transition of the space from completely illicit to collectives and cooperatives under Prop 215, all the way to present day and the, myriad of versions of regulations that we've had the pleasure of reading and combing through. But today we're going to focus on compliance, which obviously encompasses so many different things and so many parts of our businesses. And like, it's such a buzzword. It's a buzzword because it's important. It's a buzzword because it's flashy and it grabs attention, but it obviously is incredibly important. And I know we'll focus a little bit more on California, where our regulatory burden is quite heavy. And it feels like ever changing as well. And then we'll touch on some comparisons from different states, because I know Kiva is a multi-state operator. But non-compliance can lead to disruption in operations. It can lead to, regulatory penalties. It could even lead to revocation of one's license. And any person that's operating today has put in so much time, so much energy, sweat, blood, and tears, not to mention money, that losing one's license or even having it revoked could be absolutely catastrophic. So what I want to do is start out kind of light, and then we'll get to the, heavy, more serious. But let's kind of just like throw back and forth some of our favorite like compliance catchphrases. So I'm going to give you my top 3, and let's talk about some of yours. So I know they're kind of cheesy, but I do like them. So I love compliance is your guiding compass, because it really should set the direction of all the different things that you're doing. And as an attorney, again, of course, I want my clients to have the regulations lead what they're doing. Even if they can't always adhere and adopt all of them, I still want that to be the direction they're headed. Building trust through compliance is obviously so important, because our customers and our consumers rely on us to get a safe product out to market. And then, I don't know, this is the cheesiest one, but I love it. Compliance is a culture, not a checkbox. And I think I love that one so much, because so often what I'm seeing is people feel like, okay, I did the things on the checklist, now I'm done. And then we're not talking about compliance again for a very long time, or until it's like absolutely necessary. And so I do think it's something that has to be woven into the fabric of a business. So, okay, so those are my favorite ones, and I'm excited to hear which ones you like best.
Well, I think your third one reinforces your first one, right? If you've only done it once, then you're not using a compass to guide your way.
True.
Yeah, so I love all those. Love them great, but definitely the guiding compass resonates with myself for sure. Some of my catchphrases. When you come to the Kiva Compliance homepage in our intranet, you will immediately see the phrase "compliance is where integrity meets practice," because it's important for a business to be who you say you are. And compliance is the tool that verifies the values on which you build your company. Important value for Kiva is integrity, and compliance is how we demonstrate integrity throughout the company every day. So, where integrity meets practice.
Love it.
Yeah. And then a second one is probably in my worst Game of Thrones voice: compliance is a journey. It's aspirational, right? Here's a pro tip. You're not going to be 100% compliant 100% of the time, nor is that the expectation, right? That's obviously not permission to then now avoid the rules. But it's a fact that should prompt business owners to try and understand how to check that statistic for their own companies. Obviously, a company can't protect or properly assess risk without knowing what its vulnerabilities are. And so when you think about sort of where are we not compliant, that's just as important as identifying where you are compliant. But it's exhausting, right, to think about compliance in binary terms. You're not compliant or not compliant. You're somewhere on a spectrum. You're somewhere in a journey towards compliance, to your point about a guiding compass. I think the goal is to commit to perfecting compliance, prioritize really the things that matter first, including public health and employee safety, but then letting your company values guide you to success.
All right, give us one more.
And then one more, probably my favorite would be defiance through compliance.
Love it.
I don't know if this is how the author intended the phrase to be used, but I really do believe that a well-regulated and enduring industry is necessary to end prohibition. And we defy the prohibitionist arguments and expectations when we can demonstrate compliance. And my favorite example of this is probably, our biggest adversaries going into the Prop 64 battle was the League of Cities.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, recently the League of Cities put out a fact sheet on cannabis, which indicated that despite expectations, 100% of retailers that are checked are ID compliant. And so that really defies expectation that dispensaries, right, we're going to be a place for your kids to access cannabis and cannabis products, which we know just is not true. So defiance through compliance is the way to end prohibition.
I love that. That reminds me of thinking about the League of Cities, like back when, so I'm located in San Diego, and I'm versed obviously in many different cities' regulations, but I was very involved in San Diego. And we would have, and I'm sure this happened in other city council meetings too, but people that would like pull their kids from school, they're like little children, and line them up to testify, like, please don't have, a dispensary in our neighborhood. And I'm like,
do you even know what a dispensary is?
Yeah, you know what a dispensary is? And she's like, why aren't you in school? Like, that feels more like compliance to me, being in school. But or they would bring in like big bags of oregano. I'm like, oh my God, guys, it's not. Not
the crazy things that happen at the locals, right?
Yeah, we've seen some things. We have seen some things.
It's all new until it's not new.
All right. But I know we'll talk a little bit more about public safety and how important that is when we're looking at compliance, and how that very much shapes the industry's public image. And we've come a long way, but we still have a ways to go on that. Okay, so let's switch gears just a little bit. Again, as an attorney, I'm constantly talking about compliance and regulations and how to take certain business deals and fit them into these like very funny boxes of compliance. And what I really often do find out, though, is that when I really delve into the questions that my clients have, is that there are just a tremendous amount of like myths and basic misunderstandings about what compliance is. And I would love for us to maybe address some of those head on, because I really think having a bit of a conversation about that can ultimately help both big companies and smaller companies to evaluate or reevaluate how they're addressing compliance. Because I think, again, some of these myths scare people, and so then they're like, oh, they back away from it, but it is so integral to the success of a business. And I know everyone in California is like hanging on for dear life, and other states too, right? But I'm so entrenched in California. But compliance here is a heavy lift, no doubt about that. And I think people shy away from it because they just don't fully understand it or embrace it. So, okay, the first one I'm going to say, I think, is a very widely held belief that compliance is it's too expensive. It's cost prohibitive. And I would really like you to talk about that. And I'm not here trying to say that you don't have to invest in it, but I do think that there's a general feeling or notion that it's simply too expensive, especially for smaller companies. And I don't think that that's true. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that, because Kiva has grown from small to, such a force to be reckoned with, but you guys have always had compliance as one of your core values. So I'd love to hear about that a little bit. Debunk the myth and how you have figured out how to integrate compliance through the, like how your company's grown over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think something not on the list, but something I like literally just came to my my thought bubble is the idea that because you're a small business, you don't have to do compliance, right? Huge myth. Kiva has made compliance a central part of the company from day one, right? It was about you can't get consistency, you can't get product quality if you don't embrace at least a standard operating procedure that delivers that quality product every single time, right? So in terms of cost, is the cost of compliance, or it's just too expensive? Mythbuster, the cost of non-compliance is always going to be greater. That's really hard for us in the cannabis industry to understand, because the Department of Cannabis Control's enforcement lacks focus and consistency. And also because the industry hasn't begun yet to experience consumer lawsuits, which are coming. As soon as the DCC and plaintiffs' attorneys find their footing in terms of their piece of this puzzle, and they will. And when they do, you're
gonna I think, like in ADA compliance lawsuits, right? Like in this conversation, I think we are probably more focused on like regulations that are specific to the cannabis industry, but let's make no mistake. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And there are plaintiffs' bars that actually have whole webinars and seminars on how to sue the cannabis industry. I've listened in on a few of them, and it's wild. Like, and they will look for the lowest hanging fruit. But I do think, as I say, like it has started. I've had, several clients that have run into issues with their Prop 65 signage, not as recently, but as we were transitioning. I think that was like 2 years ago. And I've certainly had a number of dispensaries in particular face ADA compliance issues. So like It's happening, and it's not just the cannabis regulations, although that's a little bit more what we're focused on.
Sure. I mean, even in cannabis regulations, right? The wrong label, the wrong information, inconsistent formulas, those are all things that leave a company vulnerable. To bars. And the cost, right, of anything once you enter that space is triple the cost of anything, right? This is really a space where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of flesh.
Yeah.
The cost of attorneys, yourself included, right? Experts, investigations, the fines, all of that, right? Just to settle on what almost certainly is going to be the creation of a compliance program. Ironically, the thing that could have saved you from all those costs in the first place. So instead of thinking of compliance as a cost center, I think of compliance as sort of the company's revenue and reputational insurance plan. It's a place where compliance can also not just protect you from the incursion, but can also improve efficiencies and gain consistent results inside the company, which may generate cost savings, that were, worthy, or at least equivalent to the investment in the first place. So think of it as an investment, but even as an investment, there's ways to reduce costs. You can use technology. I mean, we're all familiar with compliance software, which is great, but there's also software programs that can help automate, employee training or automate SOP development, create documentation practices, right? AI is doing pretty amazing things for companies right now, and you should be embracing and not afraid to use that without giving your company secrets away to AI. Compliance tip.
I've been writing poetry for my mom with AI. She's like, I didn't know you had this hidden talent.
Genius. Like, all of a sudden, you're genius.
At age 42, like here I am. I'm exploring. It's early. She's really bummed when I tell her the truth.
Exactly. And for small companies, I think we talked about it earlier, outsourcing. Roughly a third of all businesses, not just cannabis businesses, but a business across the board, outsource compliance. It's a perfectly acceptable cost savings plan, but you got to take the advice, right? So it's nice to like get a compliance plan, but then you have to really figure out how to implement that plan, in your staff.
Yeah.
If you don't know where to start, or you're just, it's such a big plan or a big thing to start to tackle, prioritize the investment in developing SOPs and training to those processes. You're going to create an SOP, you're going to figure out how to do a process. Part of that is going to be, is the process legal, compliant? Is it following the regulations? So you'll build the regulation right into the SOP. And then you provide training. And that is sort of the baseline for a compliance program.
And that the employee training is so critical because a licensee is responsible for the misdeeds or misactions of their employees. So, and I've seen that haunt some of my clients that believed that their employees were properly trained, and such was not the case. I always recommend actually, like, depending on what kind of license type you are, creating some sort of quiz for a training program, and then make sure that before they hit the floor, so to speak, like they have passed this test. And again, it doesn't have to be to the level that you or I would necessarily understand or interpret, but just like there are so many things I think that could be avoided if we are able to take the time to really properly train the employees. And I'm also like, I love a good test. So
always is. And there's great software. I mean, there's AI software now that you like really you build the training in a slide presentation, and you filter it right in, and they'll create the voice and help you do the quiz. I mean, it is really amazing what technology is doing, and relatively accessible technology even for small companies.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't find it particularly challenging to use. I'm not like the most tech savvy, I wouldn't say, but okay, so let's talk. I know you've mentioned SOPs a little bit, and I do want to spend some time talking about them. So what I find is that it's for California, it's part of the licensing process. I assume it's likely part of the licensing process in other states as well. But what I find is that either my clients are just doing super boilerplate SOPs to like get through the licensing process, and they basically just like recited the regulation back.
Didn't we all do that?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm always very specific. In the beginning, of course, because we didn't know what the expectations were. But so either one, it's like we're throwing together these super generic SOPs to sort of, again, check the box, we did it, or we're drafting them and we are getting more granular, but then like we open up shop and we forget about those SOPs.
That's right.
They're just like a thing that's there in the background. Did. And so I want us to talk a little bit about, why it's so important to develop more granular SOPs, even though it feels challenging. And it can be challenging, right? To break things down to that, those really small, specific step-by-step components. And then also address like, how often do we need to be updating these? And what do we talked about training, using it for training purposes, but like, what do we do with them once we've written them?
We don't put them in a binder and let it collect dust. on the bookshelf.
I mean,
No,
I think
no,
colloquially do that, but I
right?
would like for us not to do that anymore.
And I think harkening back to what I said previously, right? I think this is a reflection of binary thinking. Either you're compliant or you're not.
Yeah.
And it's just super unlikely that the SOPs you developed before you opened and were licensed are going to accurately reflect the processes and procedures that your employees are following every day. So if you did take time, care, and thought into your initial set of SOPs, and now you're wondering why product quality is failing, or why there's extra costs showing up, or why there's product disappearing, or all this kind of like these sort of things that drive business operators insane. You can probably assess that people are not following the procedures that you created. If
Mhm.
you just created SOPs to satisfy the regulatory burden, then you're sort of leaving at the whim of your employees what processes they are following on any given day. But it's also important to think about, look, every company wants to scale. We engage new technology. Our teams change, right? Employees come and go. Your processes are going to change too, and they're going to change often when you do those things. Sometimes scaling means that you're going to have to step change a process, right? If you're engaging new technology, how is safety being managed with that technology?
Mhm.
How is privacy being managed with that technology? So lots of questions to ask. Who's capturing the changes when you make them?
Mhm.
Who's evaluating whether a change was good or bad, or resulted in a cost savings, or a cost sinking? I think those are critical things that a compliance team or a consultant can help a business figure out. But who's identifying, who needs to be trained or retrained when a process changes? We often think about training employees as they're coming on, but if you've had an employee in staff for 5 or 10 years, that employee is going to have a set of procedures, and we need to make sure that that legacy is moving along with the staff themselves. So all things that I think are important, not just to put it on the shelf, but one and done is kind of like, in honor of all the fantasy drafters this week. One and done is like drafting a fantasy football team and then failing to manage players based on new intelligence. It's certainly a strategy. It's just not a winning one.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So, like, how often do you think a company should be busting out that binder and going through and like truly doing a walkthrough, almost like a mock? Well, it wouldn't be mock, like an internal audit of your SOPs. She's like, once a year enough, once a quarter. Like, what do you think would be a good benchmark, just so we can give some nice, like, actionable?
Yeah, I think it's easy to break it down into parts, right? It depends on what you're checking and how big the company is. So in a company like Kiva, where I'm managing, right, 2 companies really, 3 if you add hemp into the mix.
I know.
But if you, I think you have to take it in bite size pieces, right? So on the Kiva side, on the confection side, part of that drive is going to be, product quality. Part of that drive is going to be, where we are in terms of inventory shifts, and what are we thinking of, what are we not thinking of, what policies are being, followed in terms of the sort of making process.
Mhm.
But then beyond that, like it's sort of checking safety and ensuring that the employees who are working with the products are themselves safe, and feel that they are in a safe environment. And so that's certainly, part of it. I think the other, so frequency can sometimes be determined based on what you're seeing in terms of output, right?
Mhm.
If something fails in output, it's an indication you need to go and figure out what's happening. We do quarterly inspections, sort of quarterly audits on SOPs, and try to make sort of the managers and directors responsible for compliance in their departments think about changes that may have occurred, or a new procedure, or just even slight changes that may have occurred, new staff, right? for metric, right? We're required every I think quarter to or month to do a monthly metric audit. Are people doing the metric audit? That's something that we do, and we use that as a standard to measure inventory accuracy. So there's ways to, again, think about compliance and do it as frequently as sort of you need to, but frequently enough to sort of assess whether changes have been made. So no fewer than a year, but preferably more like quarterly or whenever you see output failure.
I think that's right. And I think, the other thing that coming to mind is with acquisitions of other licenses, I see this happen a lot where it's like, okay, well, company A is the one that originally got the license. Now I'm the owner. Company B owns company A. Have I gone through those SOPs? Because the regulating body also wants to make sure that those SOPs are accurate. And you might meet an inspector one day who might say, like, where are those SOPs? And then walk through your facility. So I understand that that's like an asset that you're buying along with the company oftentimes. But if you are acquiring a company, it is so critical to bust open those SOPs, make sure it's what you're really doing, or tear it all down and start from scratch if it doesn't meet the pass the sniff test of what you're actually doing. So I find that's a really interesting one too, is when people are acquiring licenses or buying licenses, I don't know that they're going in and taking the time to do that because it doesn't feel urgent, right? It's like no, getting my new people and getting the the ownership changes updated, like. But it should be one of the first things that a new owner does, in my opinion.
Yeah. Especially if the magic that you're buying is a particular output or a particular type of product or outcome or, or even technology at that point. Like, how does it work? And is it working? Is it because you don't know that employees are going to stay in that acquisition? And so opening the hood and really understanding, is the company who they say they are?
I've just seen so many times though where a client will purchase a license and then we hit the ground running and I'm like, okay, hey guys, I'm typing a little email, dear blah blah blah, like let's take a look at those SOPs, and they're like, hit me up about that in a couple weeks. Hey guys, it is and again, the regulators do care. They do care that what is happening in your facility is what is on that paper.
That's right.
So, okay.
And you should care. Business operators should care.
Too. Yeah, that's true.
That they are who they say they are, and that they can produce this thing that they say they can produce.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we'll switch gears a little bit. Again, having been in the industry for quite some time, I've seen like and internalized and regurgitated every iteration of these regulations since they first came out. And
third time's
what's that?
Third time's a charm.
So many. I mean, remember there was like emergency regulations, like amendments to the emergency regulations, amendments to the amendment to. I'm like, what version are we even on? It was crazy for a while, and I have to print things out too. Like that's the way I read. Like I highlight things. Yes, there's a lot of recycling. But I read these regulations. A lot of them make complete sense to me. I get it. I understand. But there are oftentimes I look at a regulation or a compliance issue and like I will literally say out loud, like, what the F? And I think to myself, like, to what end? Like, what is it that they're trying to solve for? Is there a there, or are we just like making things up willy-nilly? Because it does feel like that sometimes. And I think that also sort of adds to this aura or air of like not caring as much about compliance, because some of them are like, they just don't make sense. So like I have two that come to my mind. And again, they'll date me. They're back from like 2018. The one that always sticks out in my mind is it was early on and everyone was so confused still, even just about like some of the most basic things, like what parts of the BCC regulations apply to everyone, like really basic fundamental things that even people like us were like, it's a little confusing. And then the then Bureau comes out with like a fact sheet about branded merchandise. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is what we're focused on. Like, people don't even understand some basic deadlines here or what their rights are under a temporary or provisional license. And you're going to focus on like making sure license numbers on my Kiva hat or like my hoodie, like it didn't make sense. So that's one that I always reference because I truly was shocked that I was like, oh, a fact sheet. And then I'm like, on branded merchandise? Like, I don't actually have any questions about that. That's one. And then the other, again, this is old, it doesn't exist anymore. But when the department tried to basically like stamp out any like non-licensed brands and basically say no one could do business with them. It was 5032B, like, and it came out of nowhere. It was not in like any of the lead up. And again, I was like, do they actually understand how this industry works? Do they understand how industry works in general, like white labeling and manufacturing services? Like, not everyone's going to get a license. And there was so much confusion around it. And I just kept asking myself, why? What is it that you're trying to protect here? Like, do you just need to know where the money's going? Okay, there's a disclosure form we can create. Like, you don't have to stamp it out all the time.
That's right.
And so many of these things were either, again, just like, this is not really important, or why? What are you solving for? So I would love to talk about, like, in your opinion, sort of like the process of rulemaking and the why. How are they getting there? And this could be, California specific, or
Sure,
compare and contrast of other states. But I know people listening in are like, they've got to be like nodding their heads with me, like, yeah, no, I remember that too. Like, there are just some wild things in there that don't make sense. And it feels, again, like an overreach, and it's confusing. It's really confusing.
it's definitely frustrating, right? There's a lot of sort of reinventing wheels that we don't necessarily have to reinvent. There are other industries we could look to for direction and sanity. But that's, not the way that they're going. I think that part of, I talk to my team internally a lot that when this frustration arises to the surface, which it does often,
Of course, yeah.
is that a reminder that our law and our subsequent regulations in California were contemplated in the wake of federal raids, in the wake of arrests, right? In the wake of interference by the Department of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in California, we need to acknowledge that while the nation has normalized its relationship with cannabis, California is still very much reeling, very tired and very arduous journey that has brought us to this point. I don't think that's an excuse, but it's just some perspective, right? For those of us that have been in the industry for quite some time to sort of bring with us. It's bad. It's been a lot worse. And so, I also think that I get it. We've had, 6 phases of these regulations, from emergency through phase 1, phase 2, whatever. BCC, GCC consolidation. We're only a few years, though, technically, into this consolidated time period, right? DCC isn't even fully staffed yet. And we're still technically in the throes of federal prohibition, right? So let's give ourselves some breathing space and maybe the regulatory agencies a little time to figure it out. They're going to identify which regulations are needed and not needed. They're going to identify a best practice versus a regulation. It's just going to take time for them, and I think for us, to get confident about telling them, just remove, like, cull the regulations, do something, create focus, have intent, ask yourselves, are these enforceable? Because absent clarity, that's what Kiva uses. I toss 2 questions around in my shop often. What is the goal, like you do? What is the goal of this regulation, and is it enforceable? It's not so that we can figure out a way around the regulation. It's more or less to understand, what is the standard, what is the baseline that we are seeking to meet here? And is it about safety? Is it about public health and safety, public health and safety, employee health and safety? Is it about a track and trace issue? Sort of what is the goal, but also is it enforceable? Meaning, is this something the department is really going to be able to hold me to a standard to? So like, which they don't always like to hear, but again, if there was some, focus, some consistency with their regulatory enforcement, we would have a better idea. But absent that, we have to ask ourselves, what can they enforce?
Do you have like do you have a favorite regulation that like not keeps you up at night, but that you feel like this just is a door that leads to a brick wall? Like this is, there's so, you could pick quite a few.
Like from premise diagrams to, I mean, I in honesty, if like we're really dealing with some of the problems that are out here and that we're seeing percolate in the system, it's probably both a regulation but also a law change, which is this sort of archaic idea that the distributor be the responsible party for calling for the COA test. There's no way, there's just no logical reason once we eliminated the true third party and true independent distribution network, that we just didn't go back and fix that issue.
Yeah.
And I think that in the wake of recalls, it's a complicated process, right? Because now you have these products moving into distribution houses. And if we're talking about contamination, like it's hard to understand sort of why we want to move product away from its source into another facility to conduct this test that may fail. And right, like it's just something that drives me bonkers. Both as a brand and as a distributor.
Well,
I also think we could eliminate, a few hundred distribution licenses overnight, and really give the department some better visibility about who's moving and distributing products.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I think back to like, again, 2018, the role of the distributor, I was like, wait, this is not actually really a distributor. I used to call it the quality control license because it had so much more responsibility than what you would think of traditionally with a distributor. But yeah, I mean, we could go through all of them and find so many. I think too, like I would just love to see certain processes streamlined. And I guess this is maybe like
licensing,
or even just like, if you're moving like locations, that doesn't have to be a whole new license application. Like you want to throw in some updated SOPs, you want to throw in a, updated premises diagram. Yeah, I love those. And how about landlord consent? Sure. That all makes sense. And I would imagine like staff at the DCC would also benefit from a more streamlined process. To your point, they're not fully staffed. And we're asking these analysts to basically look at something as if it's a fresh operator. Like, I don't know. That's just one that always pops into my mind.
It's super relevant. And I think, this year, the Cannabis Industry Association did sponsor legislation that was designed to really streamline and overhaul the entire licensing system, to give the department sort of more yes or no sort of controlled boxes instead of it being so, depends on which analyst you get on which day gives you the right or different answer, or, but like streamlining some of that and creating, eliminating some of the fluff and really focusing on what does the department need to do to ensure we know who these people are, we know how to contact them, and we know how to hold them liable if something were to go wrong.
Yeah, so much
fun. It's we got a little bit out of that bill, but we're going to come back for more. I think, overhauling and rethinking our processes where it's time, right? Policy change, evolution requires that you go back and do some evaluation. And in no circumstances can anyone evaluate this and say success all around.
Way to go. Everyone's super stoked. No, I would love for the DCC to do 2 more road shows. One, like they did at the very beginning, like a true stakeholder road show to like ask us what is troubling, what is not working for us from a compliance perspective. And then I know they did this again earlier on, but like, let's get them back on some airplanes to some other states. Like I know there's not a perfect state. They all have their challenges. And I think that we would benefit from some of our leaders in the industry, our regulatory folks, again, like having more dialogue with us directly, but also like get thee to some other states and see.
Right.
We did that in the beginning, although oddly disregarded quite a bit of what we saw. But I just think, yeah, like there can be so much more efficiency. And I think, again, that's why compliance gets such a bad rap, and people find it to be so overwhelming, because it is overwhelming. There's a lot to do there. And when you have all these things that feel not particularly relevant or necessary or directly related to public safety and health, or even protection of children, sure, like I don't think that's as overwhelmingly a problem as many people still think it is.
Sure.
But like we could just make it so much more approachable and doable if the industry, the regulators were a little bit more focused. So I don't know. That's my wish list, is that they, interact with us again. Like we're here. Like, let's do it. That was great at the beginning. I felt we were really seen and heard. And there were some good changes that were made.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about what companies can do to make compliance more of like an ongoing priority and something that's woven into the fabric of their business practices. And we've talked about it a little bit, but again, like I'm usually called upon to help with the SOPs at the very beginning, or once they've had some sort of inspection and there's an issue and we need to develop a corrective action plan. Very rarely do I get called in the in-between. And I think, again, we have to focus on making it part of the everyday business practice. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, and how, again, small companies, big companies, there's a wide range, how they can do that.
It's a good question. I think without question, it starts at the top, right? So if you're part of the executive team of a company, if you're the owner of a small business, it requires the executive team to make compliance a part of the company culture and an ethos to do the right thing. It doesn't mean that you have to make compliance a value. I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that as an executive, you need to be asking questions like, can we do that? Should we do that? What are the risks of doing that? How do we enhance safety in that process?
Mm-hmm.
How do we make that process or practice consistent? And when and if you're deviating from regulations, ask the questions why we're deviating from regulations. Is that documented? And I think your attorneys are going to thank you, but you're going to thank yourself, right? I think if we just sort of let folks do what they want to do, executives aren't being the coaches or mentors or sort of proper business leaders that are going to breed success. And so you got to ask the questions, even when they're hard questions. Arguably, that's your role as an executive leader, is to ask the hard questions. Even if that's going to take you down to a place where you're having to evaluate a risk versus a reward. And, some companies, Boeing, for instance, based on the reward, right? Don't always bank on the risk. That's a company decision. There's consequences. But if you're not doing that risk assessment, what are you doing?
Yeah. I feel like that was my like catchphrase. Like every year I've got like a new thing that my husband makes fun of me. He's like, that's what that's your favorite phrase. Like it was like, once it was like good actors versus bad actors, or like, oh, that's a heavy lift, which I still use that one all the time. But I think like risk mitigation is and risk analysis is still so critical. And I think you said this earlier, like I don't think the expectation is 100% compliant 100% of the time. Right. So if and when you are going to deviate, or sometimes we just don't know the answer, actually. I mean,
that's right.
That's right. Really, really challenging. So what I advise my clients, if it's some regulation that's changed and we're not really clear on it, is we document our correspondence to the DCC, because sometimes they just like recite the regulation back to you and you're like, great, well, I could read. Like, I know regulation says, you didn't actually give me an answer. So I want them to figure out like, how do we interpret this? And then show the work that you've done on the back end if you aren't sure that you're 100% compliant, or maybe again you just didn't fully understand it. Like I think of the July 1st regulation about the language on vapes, right, having to be like whatever the language was, these are non-disposable or whatever it was. And a lot of my clients were like, well, wait, what do we do with things that are already on the shelf and other regulations? We've had like this grace period. So in that case, like we put a little sign in front because we wanted to make sure that we were showing compliance, right? That we were making an effort. And then I had them like keep a little stack in their email of all the correspondence that I had sent to the department asking. So, again, you have to constantly like evaluate, reevaluate what level of risk you're willing to assume. A lot of people were like, I'm not willing to throw away thousands of dollars worth of inventory. I'm just not going to do it. And I was like, I understand that. Here's how we'll approach this, or here's my thoughts on how to approach it. But it's so challenging. It really is.
And it's reasonable, right? Those are reasonable concerns for a company to have. And so, yeah, I think as long as you're acting within reason, and you're documenting the why and the how, that's a minimum baseline. And I think it's the act that, right, that's the insurance policy. That protects you. So even if you do get dinged, a corrective action policy, hopefully, you have a baseline to show, like, we were guiding towards compliance. We had the right compass. Maybe it was slightly off. But, you can now work towards a corrective policy that's far easier to have than, why did you do this? We don't know. We just did it.
Or like we didn't know.
Yeah. Right. Never an acceptable answer. Right.
Yeah. No, I mean, but again, that goes back to like the responsibility of the executive team. And if you're not going to be on site every day, and I know some business owners aren't, like there's nothing wrong with that, but then you really have to make sure that your team understands and you have clearly assigned someone to take this responsibility on.
Right. So, and I think that I've said it before, right? It's prioritizing the SOPs and training, right? The processes that make your company run are your playbook. Those are the playbooks that your employees are going to use to execute your strategy. If you're not evaluating that playbook, if you're not ensuring the processes that you've created deliver the outcomes you expect, and you're holding people accountable for failing to execute those XOPs, and you're just hoping, fingers crossed, for the best outcomes at any cost, right? And that's just, that is immediately going to tank your business. And it's why those SOPs, it's why that training should be looked at as an investment. It's the way that your business is going to ultimately succeed and be consistent and deliver the same thing to consumers over and over and over again.
Yeah. So we talked about like making compliance an investment. So let's have like a few top tips, because I love all of the conversation and the, philosophical discussions, a little bit of a therapy session here for those of us who have been victimized by the regulations. But I also want to make sure that we can give some like truly actionable items here. So, right, we've talked about how compliance is truly an investment. I think we've hammered that home. So how can we make that investment to keep those, stay compliant, keep that competitive advantage, sharpen our edges? What are like 2 or 3 actionable tips that you can give viewers?
Good question. You gotta start now, right? And that's how you keep your competitive edge. Just start now. You start small. Don't again, it's not binary. You don't have to like tackle the whole problem. You can tackle bite-sized pieces of compliance and be working towards the goal. And then third and foremost, I think you gotta join a trade association. You do not have time, unless you're Kim, unless you're myself. You don't have time to contemplate all the things that are happening, law, policy change, regulation change, the conversations with the department. Like, who has time to manage that stuff? Trade associations have time to manage that stuff, and they report out constantly what the department and what the legislature is doing. If you want to, sort of thinking about compliance as the edge, regardless of what your company goal is, if it's efficiency, if it's scaling, or if it's growth, if it's a new product launch, if it's automation, if it's technology, whatever it is, acquiring others, like you said, or buying out, getting bought out. It's a highly this highly regulated industry that doesn't value compliance right now, having a compliance program or at least baselines or compliant processes in place will be the competitive edge that helps you achieve that goal, and maybe make the goal a little bit more sweeter at the end. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are nearing our time, but I do want to get a little bit more granular. I want to talk more specifically about enforcement, right? Because
Ooh,
ultimately, that's well, right. Compliance is it should be again like a leading your guiding compass in your company for growth and scaling, but also we don't want to have an enforcement action. I mean, ultimately, like let's call a spade a spade. We care a lot about compliance, of course, for our
sure.
consumers and the industry as a whole, but we also don't want to get in trouble. So, um,
It's
you
the
know,
stick part of compliance, right?
yeah.
Carrots.
Yeah. So my experience is that I don't find a ton of consistency in what the DCC actually cares about, or really in terms of like penalties or enforcement measures that are, that are doled out. Like I've had one particular client that comes to mind who kept violating like the same regulation over and over and over and over and over and over again. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe haven't gotten in trouble. And also, can you please just stop doing this? But then I had another client who did something that, in my opinion, was like far less concerning, and had, again, just one gal's opinion, wasn't necessarily as much of a risk to the consumers, and that client ended up getting their license revoked. And I was like, jaw on the ground. I mean, even still now, I'm like, I'm just really shocked. Like when you look at these two different things, multiple violations over and over again of the same thing versus, yeah, I'm not saying the other client didn't have some fundamental problems, but they were all, to me, things that I felt like could have been worked through. And um, I thought we did a good job of explaining why these things happened,
For
and it was it's just kind of wild. So it does feel like the Wild West in that way, and I'm not sure that the DCC even necessarily has a priority list. So I would love to hear from you, especially as a multi-state operator,
right.
California in terms of its enforcement versus other states and what that looks like and feels like. And I think you have a unique perspective again because you have operations in multiple states.
We do. Yeah, so I think you're right. In California, I think I would agree. I think that there's a lack of consistency and a lack of focus. I think that part of that is about just the sheer volume of rules
There's too many of
that
them.
they have to manage, and frankly that we have to manage, right? It's a two-way street. Like, and so that creates, right, like I can't become 100% compliant 100% of the time. There's just too much of it. And so I have to prioritize. I don't know. I'm taking my best guess
Mhm.
what I think the department is likewise prioritizing, but I mean, it would be super helpful if they put out a list of prioritization. Absent the list, I mean, I have to make guesses on what I see on the websites, right? So, clearly, like they're taking an interest in product quality,
Yeah.
safety, what recalls, but they could be doing that better. I think there's, starting maybe to take an interest in labeling, but again, they could be more consistent and better at that process. I would probably best describe in terms of comparatively, the word that comes to mind about California is generally their enforcement has been hesitant. I don't think they've been, and maybe it's because of their lack of focus and consistency. Therefore, they're hesitant to act or second guess ourselves or are not sure on footing. But certainly, prioritization could help
But help
alleviate.
them too. I mean, again, it's like they're a company in a way as well, you
That's
know?
right. I mean, no, they have to manage the regulations. That's their job, right? I think other states, comparatively, when I say proactive, I think they're just a little bit more proactive. It is there. again, there's inconsistency among the states. And I think that's by design, right? If you're laboratories of democracy, of course, different laboratories are going to do different things. That's the point. And so like right in New York, they're really incredibly focused on enforcing against illicit retailers while standing up the new licensees. You know, that's a feat we said we couldn't do in California, that we couldn't be doing this and doing that. And so New York, I think, is definitely showing that, you know, they understand that an inflection point for the process is not just illicit cultivation, but the retailers and the place that people get access.
Absolutely.
Illinois, you know, they have an interesting, they have some really strict label rules and approvals. Sometimes are challenging in that jurisdiction. So the things that fly in California, for instance, a tent on the tin in California doesn't raise an eyebrow, but for some reason in Illinois, a tent on a label is somehow or has previously been deemed attractive to children. So it's kind of trying to understand that not only are you dealing with different jurisdictions at that sort of multi-state scale, you're dealing with entirely different cultural apparatuses, right? What flies in California ain't gonna fly in Missouri. And speaking of Missouri, right, they're incredibly focused on track and trace, right? Like in the last month, Missouri has recalled something like 175,000 products, all because of miscalculations or you know not accurately tracking those products in metric. So they're really focusing on their seed to sale program, and I think trying to understand how to use seed and sale to really track and measure the product from seed to sale as intended.
In a just quick question, purely because I'm curious, in Illinois, do you have to get approval for your packaging and labeling before?
There's a process that you can get approval from the state. Yeah,
I feel like I would love to have that here.
I have asked for that here.
We all have asked for it.
Yeah, I think Kiva has definitely commented it. The FDA, right? Their program is voluntary. You can do it. You can submit a label to the FDA for volunteers.
Yeah, like,
but I think that would help
cost saving
and enforcement on labels, and I think it would help provide a guide that if you're seeing consistent things, or if they're saying no on some things, we would at least have some idea of sort of where the boundaries are in that space.
Well, and I've always said, and I certainly don't have the solution of like how to fix this, but like attractive to children is so you know,
you see it.
Like, I don't know, like I love tie-dye still, but like one might argue that's attractive to children. Though
Right.
My aesthetic, I joke, is like that of like a 13-year-old girl. I'm like, give me all the pink and all the sparkles. But right, like that's
right. It's unicorns belong to me.
Yeah, why not? So yeah, that's interesting. So I wish that's something like if I had a wish list, I think that would save a lot of people a lot of headache. Because again, too, like you order that in bulk. You're not ordering like a singular package, right? I mean, and then that tapers into like environmental concerns, like how much waste there is if it's not correct. Or anyway, we could probably talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's
all day long.
It's
yeah, but let's move on because I think we're running out of time here. Okay. Let's talk about, okay, if you ran the Department of Cannabis Control, let's put that like little crown on your head, Caren Woodson, what would be your like enforcement priorities? What would you list them as?
So as a former regulator, I wouldn't want that job again, especially not at home. I do give an immense amount of credit to Nicole and the folks over at DCC that have taken this role on. But if I ran the department and I had omnipotent powers, I would 100% be really trying to understand and use metric to identify nefarious activity. I just think it's an underutilized, really significant resource the department has. They live, in this case, not to use the same word again, but they have omnipotent visibility over how the products are moving. And Kiva, like inside our own shop, we have used metric to the very small, visibility we have to identify where we think product is moving beyond the small closed loop of our system here, and have sought to, no longer deliver to those licenses and, cut them out of the network. That it's tough when that falls on the licensee to do the job that I'm literally paying the department to do. So that's something I would definitely do. The second thing I would do is I applaud the recall effort. I think they're missing the mark. And instead of just, so like,
because we have people from, tuning in from all over. Just by way of quick background, we are getting like recall notices, mostly on flour. I think I've seen the last few days, I've seen
products
on oil, but like every other day, it feels like one is coming out. So we are having just context for that California is getting tons and tons and tons of mandatory recalls going on. So
yeah, and I think that's, I think the intention of those recalls is good, right? We want to inform consumers that may be inhaling some potentially bad products. But instead of just identifying the labeled products, in this case, the white label or the brand, it would be very helpful to use the track and trace software previously mentioned to identify the source of the recall and force the inspections to include the swabbing of those plants, the swabbing of these facilities, so that we can capture the issue, whatever the issue is, at its source, right? When Chipotle like pops for whatever they pop for, they go all the way back to the producer. They're tracking the problem back, not just saying, well, I had bad guacamole this day, everyone who had a bowl. Like, they still have to do the back end part of that investigation. And I would love to know that the recalls would be more meaningful if that sort of investigative part was happening.
And would help licensees and public safety as well. So yeah, that's true. All right, give us one more, and then we'll I want to hear like your predictions as we're closing out the year here for 2025 enforcement, and then we'll try and close with something hopeful.
One more, if I ran the department, I would probably try to focus more, or at least make enforcement against the illicit retailers as high a priority as we've seen the cultivation enforcement. I think we do a great job at really enforcing on the cultivation sector, and that's important to, protect our environment. But I think retail shops wreak havoc, especially when we have so few legal retail shops.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, there's still so many jurisdictions that have outright bans, which really is, and I say this all the time, is another one of my favorite little catchphrases, is all the city is doing is banning regulated cannabis.
That's right.
They're not actually it's not going away. People who have been growing or selling for years and years and years aren't all of a sudden going to be like, you know what? I think I'm going to enroll back in school. I'm going to start a brand new career. Like, that's not happening. It's just not. So they're still, they very much exist. They're very much
and it's one thing to tell people to use a legal shop. It's another to make sure that they understand they don't have a legal shop in their jurisdiction, and encourage them to go and make shops happen in their jurisdiction, right? Like we've got to start changing laws at the most local level, especially to increase access. And that is really going to be consumer demand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so just sort of like last thought on enforcement, and then we'll wrap it up here. We'll try and make it a happy ending. A happy ending, Kim.
Predictions for 2025. We're gonna see what happens with intoxicating hemp, right? The governor recently came out with a new enforcement policy and regulations for intoxicating hemp products. So interesting to see what they do in terms of enforcement. My hope would be that as they're enforcing against intoxicating hemp products, they use the right hand to also enforce with the illicit cannabis products, and sort of wrap those into the same same enforcement action. Labels, I think that we're starting to see on that recall list a couple products pop for labels. I think the department, you're right, attractive to children is a broad standard. I think there's ways that you can enforce those that are far over the line, maybe not around the line is harder to think, but for those that are stepping way beyond the scope of and what we know to be attractive to children, I think you're going to start to see the department maybe do some increased enforcement around there. There's a joint legislative audit committee that's going to be looking at the department's enforcement of the attractive to children standards. So I think that may prompt some additional scrutiny. And then I think that's on a good note. I don't think there's going to be much change.
Okay.
So that's a good note, right? No change is good. You want
we
to deal
need a
with
minute.
growth, but hey, like,
well, but I would even take that, like, just a moment to catch our breath, take a minute.
Yeah.
So, all right. So yeah, I like that maybe we have a year of just sort of calm and quiet on the constant change side. What do you hope? Like, again, I'm granting you, I will be your genie. I'm granting you a wish. Like, what do you wish and hope to see change over the next, like the 12 months or so? And again, in 2025 for businesses to be able to really take all the things that we just talked about and now implement them. Like, what would your wish be, or your optimistic look out on that?
Oh man, the idea of getting a genie, I would want 3 wishes in true genie.
You can 3.
I think the realistic wish is that, to borrow a phrase from yesteryear, I'd love for the DCC to cut the red tape, to really cull the licensing process and the regulations in favor of enforceable rules that are laser focused on public health and safety, and just cut the fluff. So that would be one. If I had to pick 2 others, we need a new way forward. I'm not like in California. It's if I'm looking at a genie, I'm asking for a new way forward. We are long past due evaluating these rules, and not just the rule but the law. How CRSA requires some evaluation and some change to better reflect, I think, what the governor was aiming to get to with the Blue Ribbon Commission. So, another pathway forward. And I'd love to, for the first time in a long time, the industry to be working together. And be working like these things, sharing information and creating dialogue, and not always in such a fierce competitive mode, but sort of helping to float all boats.
Well, we all rise and fall together, really, at this point. Like, one bad actor, right? It's my old 2018 catchphrase. Can really mess things up. So we and it's okay to not agree on everything. Nope. But we do need to have, respectful, thoughtful discourse about it. Right. And I mean, my wish would be like tax relief. I don't see how how we can continue on it at this rate as well. So I mean, we shall see what 2025 has in store. I am trying to be a half glass full kind of gal. It can be tiring in this industry, but thank you so much, Caren, for your time and your insights. I think everyone knows the Kiva brand, but if you haven't tried it, try it. 10 out of 10. Never met a Camino I didn't like. Truly, never met one. And thank you so much. And if there's any final thoughts you want to share, or close us out.
Compliance is a journey. I really appreciate this conversation. And if I can, I'll just do a shameless plug.
Absolutely.
Dispensary near you soon. Be sure to check out the new Lost Farm 100, the ultimate heavyweight edible experience. It's got your favorite strain and flavors, and a new extra potent gummy.
That too will be a journey, Caren.
It will be a journey for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you.
This is Kimberly Simms with Regulated Roots. Have a great one.